Here's a principle from high stakes performance that explains why so many brilliant students struggle during their defense despite knowing their research inside and out. It's a principle that applies to fighter pilots, surgeons, professional athletes, and yes, to you defending your dissertation. You don't rise to the occasion. Under pressure, you don't suddenly perform better than you've ever performed before. You perform at the level your nervous system has been conditioned for. When stress hits, you fall back to what you've practiced, not what you know. Let me explain what I mean by the difference between knowledge and performance. Knowledge is understanding your research, being able to explain your methodology in detail, articulating your contribution to the field, knowing why you made the choices you made, understanding your data and what it means. Performance under pressure is something different. It's accessing that knowledge when your threat response is activated. It's thinking clearly while your heart is racing. It's articulating complex ideas when your prefrontal cortex has reduced resources. It's staying coherent when your body is screaming that this is important and potentially threatening. Knowledge is necessary. You absolutely need to know your research, but it's not sufficient. Performance under pressure is a separate skill that must be trained, and most students don't train it. They accumulate knowledge and hope that'll be enough. Here's what happens when pressure hits an untrained nervous system. Your threat response activates. Your amygdala fires up. Cortisol floods your system. Blood leaves your prefrontal cortex and redirects to your large muscle groups. Your working memory shrinks. Working memory is the mental workspace where you hold information and manipulate it, where you process questions, construct responses, connect ideas. Under threat, that workspace becomes dramatically smaller. You can hold fewer pieces of information at once. You can't juggle as many concepts simultaneously. And suddenly, your knowledge becomes inaccessible. The information is still in your brain. It didn't disappear. But the pathways to retrieve it are compromised. It's like trying to access files on a computer when the hard drive is damaged. The data is there, but you can't get to it efficiently. This is why students often respond to anxiety about their defense by studying more. They read additional papers. They memorize more details about their data. They go over their methodology again and again. They think, if I just know this well enough, if I understand it deeply enough, I'll be able to handle any question. But here's the problem. Studying more can actually make the anxiety worse, not better. Because the problem isn't lack of knowledge. The problem is that your nervous system hasn't learned to access that knowledge when your threat response is activated. You're adding more data to a system that doesn't know how to retrieve data under stress. Studying more is like preparing for a marathon by reading books about running. The information might be interesting. You might learn a lot about proper form and pacing strategies, but your body doesn't get stronger from reading about exercise. You have to actually run. You have to train your cardiovascular system, your muscles, your endurance, through repeated exposure to the actual physical stress of running. Same principle applies to cognitive performance under pressure. Let me give you some examples of how elite performers in other fields handle this. Fighter pilots don't just study aerodynamics and combat tactics. They train under progressively difficult conditions. They start with basic maneuvers in calm, clear weather. Then they add complexity, multiple aircraft, communication with ground control, navigation challenges. Then they add time pressure, complete this mission in 10 minutes. They simulated threats, enemy aircraft, missile warnings, then actual G-forces that affect their cognition and vision that make it physically difficult to think clearly. By the time they feel real combat, their nervous system has experienced similar levels of stress hundreds of times. They've practiced making life or death decisions while under physical strain, while being disoriented, while tackling multiple threats, while their body is telling them they're in danger. So when real combat hits and their threat response fully activates, they don't freeze. Their trained response takes over. They've done this before. Their nervous system knows this. It knows this is stressful, but I can function, I can think, I can make decisions. I've functioned under these conditions many times. Surgeons do the same thing. They don't just study anatomy and surgical techniques in textbooks. They practice procedures on simulators, on cadavers, under supervision, over and over, in progressively challenging scenarios. Equipment malfunctions, unexpected bleeding, anatomy that's different than the textbook showed, time pressure when a patient's condition is deteriorating. When they're in an actual emergency and operating room with a patient's life in their hands, their nervous system isn't experiencing that level of stakes for the first time. They've practiced the physical movements hundreds of times. They've made decisions under time pressure. They've dealt with complications. They've experienced the weight of responsibility. So when something goes wrong during surgery, and things always go wrong, they don't panic. Their trained response activates. They've practiced staying calm and functional when things don't go as planned. Their steady hands aren't just technical skill. They're a conditioned nervous system, a threat response that's been trained to stay regulated under high stakes. Your defense requires the same kind of conditioning. Your defense is a high-stakes cognitive performance. You need to think clearly when someone challenges your assumptions, access complex information quickly when asked an unexpected question, articulate nuanced ideas under time pressure when your committee is waiting for your response, respond intelligently to questions you didn't prepare for, defend your methodological choices when someone disagrees with them, and yes, admit limitations or gaps in your knowledge without falling apart, without that admission undermining your confidence for the rest of the defense. You need to do all of this while your threat response is activated, while your amygdala is firing, while your body is telling you this is important and potentially dangerous. To do that reliably, not just hoping it works out, but reliably performing well, your nervous system needs to have practiced these skills under similar conditions, not just thought about them, not just rehearsed them in calm moments with supportive people. Actually practice them while experiencing pressure. Here's how the training principle plays out in your defense. If you've trained only under calm conditions, if all your practice has been with your advisor, with friends, in low-pressure rehearsals, there will be a large performance drop when pressure hits. The gap between your calm condition performance and your under-pressure performance will be significant. You know your material, but under threat, you can't access it the way you normally can. If you've trained under moderate pressure, if you've used some of the techniques from Module 3, if you've practiced with some discomfort and time constraints, your performance will hold up better. The gap will be smaller. You'll still experience some performance decline when your actual defense creates real threat activation, but it'll be less dramatic than someone who's completely untrained. If you've trained under defense-like conditions, unpredictable questions about your actual research, genuine evaluation from someone assessing your competence, your threat response actually activated during practice, your performance will hold up well. The gap will be minimal because your nervous system has been here before. It's experienced this level of pressure and learned, okay, this is uncomfortable, but I can function. I've done this, I can do it again. This is why some students who know their research perfectly still struggle in their defense, while other students who might know slightly less perform better under pressure. It's not about who has more knowledge stored in their brain. It's about whose nervous system has been trained to access and articulate that knowledge under the specific conditions a defense creates. So what can you do right now to start training for pressure? Let me give you 3 practical techniques. First, practice articulating your research while under physical stress. Do jumping jacks for 30 seconds. Actually get your heart rate up, get a little out of breath, then immediately explain your methodology out loud for 2 minutes without stopping. Don't pause to catch your breath. Just start explaining and keep going. This works because it trains the specific skill you need. Clear thinking while your body is in an activated state. Your heart is racing. You're slightly out of breath. Your body is sending signals that something is happening, that you're activated, and you have to think clearly anyway. You have to retrieve information, organize your thoughts, articulate coherently, all while your physiology is stressed. It's not the same as threat activation from social evaluation, but it's training the same neural pathways, maintaining cognitive function while your body is not in a calm, resting state. You're teaching your prefrontal cortex to stay functional even when it's getting signals that your body is activated. Second, practice with intentional discomfort. Stand in an uncomfortable position while explaining your research. Stand on one leg for 3 minutes while articulating your contribution to the field, or hold a slight squat position, not deep enough to be painful, but uncomfortable enough that you have to actively maintain it while walking through your methodology. Set a timer, 3 minutes, and you have to maintain the position the entire time while also explaining complex ideas clearly. This creates physical discomfort that your brain has to manage while simultaneously managing cognitive load. You're training your prefrontal cortex to allocate resources to two challenging tasks at once: maintaining the uncomfortable position and articulating complex research. This strengthens the pathways you need during your defense, when your brain has to manage the discomfort of threat activation while also performing cognitively demanding tasks. Third, use progressive overload in your practice. This is a principle from physical training that applies perfectly to cognitive performance training. Don't try to jump straight into the hardest possible practice conditions. Build up gradually. Start with easy questions, things you can answer comfortably, then progressively make them harder. Start with unlimited time to think through your response, then gradually add time pressure, 2 minutes, then 90 seconds, then 60 seconds. Start with a friendly, supportive tone from whoever's asking you questions, then practice with someone being more challenging, more skeptical, more critical of your choices. Gradually increase the difficulty so your nervous system adapts progressively rather than getting shocked by sudden, overwhelming pressure. This is how athletes train. You don't try to lift your maximum weight on day one. You progressively increase the load so your muscles and nervous system adapt. Same principle applies to cognitive performance under stress. Now, here's the important limitation of these three techniques. They're valuable. They will help you. They create physical stress, cognitive load, progressive adaptation, all useful for building general stress tolerance. But they still don't replicate the specific threat your defense creates. They don't create the social evaluative threat that your amygdala responds to most strongly. Being out of breath from jumping jacks isn't the same as being evaluated by people with power over you. Standing uncomfortably on one leg isn't the same as facing unpredictable questions about research you've spent years on. These techniques help you think more clearly under physical activation. They build general resilience. They're better than nothing, significantly better than just rehearsing under calm conditions. But they're not the same as training under the specific conditions your defense will create. The full combination, unpredictable, challenging questions about your actual research asked by someone who's genuinely evaluating your competence under time pressure with real stakes while your threat response is fully activated by social evaluative threat. Most students never train under these specific conditions. They accumulate knowledge through years of study. They rehearse content with supportive people. They might do some of the physical stress exercises I just described, but they never experience that full combination. So they walk into their defense with knowledge but not training, with information but not conditioning. They're hoping their knowledge will carry them through. Sometimes it does, often it doesn't. The performance you deliver in your defense won't be determined by how much you know. It'll be determined by how well your nervous system has been trained to access and articulate that knowledge under the specific type of pressure your defense creates. You fall to the level of your training, not your knowledge. If your training has only been under calm conditions, that's the level you'll perform at when pressure hits, regardless of how much you know, regardless of how many papers you've read, how well you understand your data, how clearly you can explain everything when you're relaxed. In the next module, we're going to talk about a specific moment that causes enormous anxiety for students. What to do when you don't know the answer to a question. When your committee asks something you weren't expecting. When you draw a blank. When you realize you made an error or overlooked something. What do you actually do in that moment? Because that moment will happen during your defense. It happens to everyone. And how you handle it will determine whether it's a minor stumble that you recover from quickly or whether it derails your confidence and affects the rest of your performance. We'll cover the specific techniques that work when your brain is under pressure and you need to recover fast.